The story that I'm bringing you today is an interesting one, but unfortunately, a lot of the background information had to come from this made for TV movie from 1995. And you know how that goes. Sometimes liberties are taken with stuff. So I've done my best to weed through what I think is just sort of drama for effect and what is actual fact. It's cross reference with actual court stuff. So I feel fairly confident that what I'm going to tell you is truthful. And FYI, if you are interested, the movie is called Murder Most Likely. I have watched it and thereby saved you 2 hours of your life that you're never going to get back. Now, I'm not a movie critic, but if you like early 1990s Canadian made for TV dramas, that's exactly what you would expect from that genre. And it really irritates me when I research a case and there's way more background information, like information on the killer than on the victims. I think that background information is so important. Like, I like to know just little tidbits about the person. It kind of helps me understand their choices. But alas, I don't really have that today, but we're going to muddle through. This is the murder of Jeanette Kelly. But to talk even a little bit that I do know about Jeanette, first we have to go talk about Patrick Kelly, who became her husband. Patrick was born in Ontario in 1949, but he actually grew up in BC. And as a young adult, he moved back to Ontario and then settled in Toronto, where he joined the RCMP in 1971. Now, the RCMP, if you don't know, is kind of like Canada's version of it's like a cross between like the FBI and like state troopers. In rural areas and smaller towns, they act as the police force there, but they are funded by the federal government. So they also do federal and major investigations like cybersecurity, tracking down online predators, that kind of stuff. And they have this undercover drug squad that works in tracking down like international drugs shipments. So Patrick, from the very beginning of his career, he showed a lot of potential for working undercover. He was really calm under pressure, and he could be really charming. And he was just a really good actor. He also didn't have a family at the time, so he was pretty fearless. So he went undercover in 1975, posing as an international drug smuggler of heroin and cocaine. Now, I'm not sure if he was always a douche canoe or he grew into one, but he definitely was a douche canoe. So very early on, he decided that being a dirty cop was going to be more lucrative than his day job. So he started to covertly carry large sums of cash out of South America on behalf of wealthy individuals and the Roman Catholic Church. He said later, if they wanted to move their assets, I was available for 20% of the asset. But he insisted that I did not join the other side. These were legitimate folks who wanted to flee South America for one reason or another. So, sometime either just before, just after he went undercover, he went on vacation in Mexico and he met this lovely French woman named Jeanette. And she was like French, not Canadian French, and lived in France at the time. But it was this whirlwind romance, and they were quite smitten with each other. So it didn't take long before Jeanette was packing up and moving to Toronto to be with Patrick, and they were soon married. Now, according to this made for TV movie, Jeanette's mom wasn't too happy, said that there was something about Patrick that she didn't like from the very beginning, that he was just too smooth and like too good to be true. Now, in the movie, the actress that played her said there was a lie for him. Now, I don't know if her mom actually said those words at the time, but I think it's a great line. Like when you get that off feeling about someone, there's a lie in them. So I like that. And that was Patrick. That was pretty much what he was. But Jeanette didn't get that vibe from him. She just remained deeply in love with him. And she got a job then with Canadian Airlines as a reservation agent. Now, this undercover work in the 1970s paid about $21,000 a year. Now, I Googled the inflation conversion on that, and it's about $110,000 a year in 2022, which seems exorbitant um, to me of an increase. But I think the City of Calgary police, like regular street police officers, make about $80,000 a year. So I don't think it's way off base. It sounds like a lot of money. especially if you're not living in Canada. The average salary here is about $72,000 a year. And I'm sure there's some of you that are thinking, like, what? Like, I make way less than that. And then there's others that are wondering how someone can live off of that. It's just an average. My point is, he's doing okay, but he's not wealthy. So they were renting a place in the city, and they eventually bought this beautiful stately home in the suburbs. Now, probably from the dirty money. And when I say dirty money, like I'm talking mob stuff, like money laundering, making deliveries for the cartel, like dirty, filthy money. And Jeanette didn't ask a lot of questions about finances. She trusted Patrick that his work was covering these expenses. She's from France. She wouldn't be expected to know the standard of living here versus salaries and that kind of thing. So one of the things that they loved was collecting antiques with this dirty money. And I think some of the other RCMP members were starting to kind of wonder how he could afford this lifestyle that he was living off of his salary. RCMP is union, so it's a salary range. It's not like a private company where one person can negotiate a salary that's way off base from someone else's. He's also a completely arrogant douche canoe, so I don't think he was particularly well regarded by his fellow coworkers. However, he did have these two friends that worked undercover with him. John Hasty, who was married to a woman named Dawn Tabor, who is another police officer. Not a lot is said about Patrick's relationship with John, but Dawn and Patrick were close. And then Dawn, was also friends with Jeanette. We're going to come back to Dawn a bit later because she is a strange cookie and has a lot to do with some stuff that comes later in this story. So rumors were starting to run pretty rampant about Patrick's income status. And rather than lay low, Patrick lived this lifestyle that was well out of reach of most undercover cops. He drove a silver Porsche. He went on lavish vacations. He bought all these expensive antiques. And it was later revealed that Patrick had about 20 different credit cards and 6 different bank accounts to keep track of all these illicit funds that he had. But this country living was starting to wear a little thin on the couple, so they just felt a little bit more alive in the city. So Patrick put their home up for sale and then purchased this really expensive condo on the 17th floor of the Palace Pier high rise in Etobicoke, which is a suburb of Toronto, which overlooks Lake Ontario to like the front and then the Humber River to the east. It is still standing. It's on Lakefront Drive in Etobicoke. It's built in this like interesting V shape, but rather than sell, the house in the suburbs caught fire and burnt to the ground. Now, naturally, the timing on this didn't look very good. The house wasn't selling, and this guy that a number of people suspect is on the takes tries to collect the insurance money when this house burns down. So the OPP, or the Ontario Provincial Police, launched this investigation into the fire, which pissed Patrick right off. Imagine him, of all people, being questioned about his honesty. Now, unfortunately, they weren't able to prove that he had started the fire himself, despite finding a gas can in the living room of his house. And now, he even took a polygraph test and passed it, so they had no choice but to pay out this insurance claim. But they continued this internal investigation, and rather than face being questioned and like looked into, he resigned, and then the case against him was just dropped. But having a husband with an investigation hanging over him can kind of put a strain on a marriage, as did the numerous affairs that he was having, like many, many, many of them. Now, I'm sure Jeanette found out about some of them, but some of them went under the radar, including this quasi affair with Dawn Tabor, this strange cookie that I mentioned earlier. Now, the reason that I say she's strange is because, well, she is. She was married, but she was sometimes sleeping with Patrick, but not serious. But then maybe serious. Still friends with Jeanette. And then this relationship with Patrick, like her story just keeps changing about it. Sometimes it was just a fling, and then sometimes she said they planned on leaving the country together. But she was also aware that Patrick had met this new woman, Jan Bradley, who was planning on flying to Hawaii. Um, in the beginning of April of 1981, which would conveniently coincide with Jeanette being away in Italy for this language course of something that she was doing. So she was scheduled to leave on the afternoon of March 29th. But regardless of all of this, according to Patrick, and we all know a husband would never lie about such a thing, Jeanette was packing for her trip on the morning of March 29th, so just doing her thing. And they had both been complaining about this rattling noise that it was coming from the balcony. Um, like there was some flashing on the floor of the balcony above them that was loose, and it was annoying. So while Patrick was in the kitchen making himself some tea, she grabs a kitchen stool and goes out onto the balcony to fix it. And this is about an hour before she's supposed to leave for this flight of hers. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't normally start any kind of home improvement projects before I leave for the airport, but maybe Jeanette's more of a go-getter than I am. So seconds later, Patrick heard Jeanette scream and he ran out to the balcony. And in his words, he says, quote, "As I rounded the corner, I saw Jeanette falling backward. I ran to the edge of the balcony in an attempt to save her. I actually had my hands on her, but by that time she was already moving out and down," end quote. So he says that he raced to either the elevator or the stairs, 17 floors. It's interesting, no one really says which one it was. I think it would be the stairs. I think if I was in a panic, I would instinctively take the stairs, not wanting to like push a button and wait for an elevator. And then what if there's people on the elevator waiting to get off or something? Anyways, total sidetrack. Regardless, he doesn't matter. He could have got there by teleportation and it wouldn't have been in time to save Jeanette. Now, witnesses say that Patrick was acting as, like as expected. He was shaken, he was crying, he was completely in shock. But the police initially, like, they're just not buying it. As Detective Sweet says in season 2 of my podcast, it's just the little things. It's just a feeling. Um, like for one, why is she using a stool to fix this balcony an hour before her flight? It's not completely impossible that she would do that, but it's odd. And then Patrick says everything was completely great in their relationship, but they'd found this 17-page separation agreement that had been drawn up, which Patrick explained away as it was just something that they were contemplating a while ago, but things are all cool now. And then the distance that her body had fell from the building, it didn't line up with a stumble and a fall. Like it was more like a push. So they tried like timing it, like how long it would take to get from the kitchen to the balcony, and it was 3.5 seconds. So she would have actually been near the ground by then, but he says he had his hands on her before she fell. And then there's these insurance policies. So Patrick stood to receive a total of $280,000 in insurance money from accidental death. And then the autopsy revealed a few little interesting facts. So she had a cut on the inside of her upper lip and what looked like bruises on her face, despite landing face up. And apparently her heart had actually stopped beating before she had landed. So this was kind of deduced from there was no active bleeding from her head injury. The medical examiner wrote in his report that the injury to head was actually from blunt force trauma before the fall and possibly from a fist. And then a couple of days after Jeanette's death, police got a call from that strange cookie, that Don Tabor, telling him to look into Patrick, that she had a feeling that he had killed her. No specific reason was given, just this feeling. But around that time, they weren't able to sit down with Patrick and talk to him because, well, remember that secret trip to Hawaii that he had planned on taking his new squeeze, Bradley to? I always say Bradley. Jan Bradley to just after Jeanette was to leave for Italy. Well, he still went on that vacation, but they didn't have enough to arrest him at the time, which is a little bit odd because, I mean, we'll get to that later because nothing really more substantial than circumstantial evidence ever comes out on him. So, anyways, Patrick married his side girlfriend Jan, and they moved to France. And then Dawn moved back to Maine, where she was originally from, and that was kind of it for about 2 years. And then, for some really odd reason, Dawn Tabor contacted the police in Toronto and invited them out to New Hampshire for something that she wanted to tell them in February of 1983. And she told them that she had actually been in the apartment on the exact time that Jeanette fell from the building. Now, why Dawn would never face any charges for this original omission in her story reeks of a little side deal that she had reached with the investigators of some kind of immunity in exchange for testimony, because she revealed that Patrick had actually conspired with her that they were going to leave the country together and go to France, which is exactly what he did, but with Jan and not her. Now, not necessarily that he was going to kill Jeanette to accomplish that, but in a like, just don't worry about her, I'll take care of her kind of thing. Now, Patrick was short on money. All of his dirty work that he'd been doing behind this blue badge wasn't exactly paying well because, well, he was being investigated for all the dirty stuff. And one thing that the cartel knows is that people that are sniffing around you makes you more of a liability than you are worth to them. So these deliveries that he had been doing were starting to dry up. She says that on the day that Jeanette had been murdered, she arrived in their apartment. It was around 12:30, which was 2.5 hours before she died. She wanted to make up with Jeanette over something that they had recently had an argument over, which is again a little bit odd because she also says that she was there to take Jeanette to the airport. So, which was it? Uh, Now, she says she was in the den, which kinda has a view of all the other areas of the apartment. It's a high-rise building that faces the water, so there's lots of huge open windows, and the apartment's built in this weird V shape. So anyways, she overheard an argument between the couple, and she says that Jeanette was egging Patrick on because she was refusing to give Patrick a divorce. Um, Now, I would question her story at this point. Like why was she really there and why was she in the den? Um, if let's say I had this recent s- let's say I had a recent squabble with a close friend of mine and I'm still supposed to take her to the airport. I mean, yes, I would arrive a few minutes earlier than needed to sorry, like to apologize and do that kind of thing. Um, but then I'd be there to say like, "Okay, now get your stuff and go, and we'll talk more about it on the way." I'm not arriving 2.5 hours early and then going and sitting in the den while her and her husband have an argument. Um, and so let's say she did arrive at that time and the argument started, like, I mean, I can totally see that if you're at your friend's place and the couple starts bickering, it's awkward. So you'd probably move to a different room to give them some privacy. But if I heard the word divorce during the argument, like I'm pretty sure I'm going to quietly excuse myself and like wait in the hall or something. I mean, if you're hearing the word divorce in an argument, that's not a, "Oh, you left your shoes by the front door" kind of squabble. I mean, that's obviously a pretty big fight, and I wouldn't stick around unless I'm concerned about violence. And maybe that is why she stuck around, but she never mentioned anything about that, nor did she ever mention that she was there until 2 years later. So she testified that I heard a very, very loud scream. Then I heard the sound of somebody hitting something. Then nothing. I walked out to see what was going on. Jeanette was on the floor and Patrick was bending over her, picking her up. I took Jeanette to the balcony and he took Jeanette to the balcony and dropped her over the edge. Then he told her to take the service elevator and she got the hell out of Dodge. Now, I, for one, would be flying out of the building screaming to the police at that point, but not Dawn. Like, she stayed completely off the radar of this whole investigation until she actually came forward with her secret. And I think, not to sound cynical, but it sounds to me that she was actually more pissed that Patrick had chosen to go on that trip to Hawaii with Jan and not her. And when she found out that he had moved to France with her and was living the life that she was promised, she decided to say, like she said, "Screw you, I'm going to go tell everybody what you did." That's my opinion on that, not necessarily fact. So when Patrick made the error of vacationing in Ontario, he was arrested and then tried for first degree murder. Now, he was convicted after about 13 hours of deliberation and mostly based off of Dawn's testimony. And he was given a life sentence with no parole eligibility for 25 years, which is the standard for first degree murder. And now, when he was convicted, he of course maintained his innocence. He still does to this day. And he said, "Now I know how Donald Marshall felt." Now, Who the heck is Donald Marshall? Well, he was an Indigenous man in Nova Scotia who was convicted of second-degree murder, served 11 years for the murder of 17-year-old Sandy Seal in 1971. Now, that was conviction was based solely on the fact that he was known to the police as someone who might do something like that. He was acquitted in 1983 when a witness came forward, and in the end, Roy Edsbury was convicted of her murder of manslaughter. Donald Marshall died in 2009 from complications from a lung transplant that he received in 2003. So, yeah, I can totally see all the parallels. Anyways, a writer named Michael Harris, who wrote the book Justice Denied about Donald Marshall's experience, became someone that Patrick thought might believe his story. So in 1986, he reached out to him hoping that he could look into his conviction for him. And he did that. He actually tracked down and found Dawn Tabor and asked her, like, what actually happened that day. And she repeated what she had said at the trial that investigation 2 years after the murder. And then suddenly, a few months later, she calls him again. And once again, this strange cookie that she is, she told this Michael Harris that she lied. And at the time that she said, yes, I was there, she overheard the argument. All that actually happened, but she didn't actually see Patrick throw her over the balcony. In this third affidavit, she said, I now know I did not see Patrick Kelly drop his wife off their balcony. I now know that it was a lie induced through the process of pressure and fear. Pressure that she says was the result of the police investigation. But that's really strange because she wasn't even on the police's radar until she herself came forward with the story about him throwing her from the balcony. But she says now that she was involuntarily hypnotized, according to the Buffalo News in the US. But this little change to her story, um, Patrick's lawyers thought might hope be enough to get him a new trial. So they prepared their appeal paperwork under Section 690 of the Criminal Code, which is used for convicted people that have exhausted all of their other appeals. Section 690 is what was used to overturn David Milgaard's conviction in 1992. Now, for all it's worth, Patrick himself had always denied that Dawn was even there that day. A whole lot of legal mumbo jumbo happened that I'm not going to bore you with, but in April of 2001, the Supreme Court of Canada rejected his appeal for this new trial, basically said that they didn't have any legal reason to overturn the Ontario Court of Appeal's denial of a new trial based on this new evidence that wasn't really new evidence. It was just this partial recantation of a witness's story, which I don't think anybody really bought anyways, that she actually saw him drop from the balcony anyways. Um, the fact is, it remains that he had a motive, and then he was convicted based on the fact that even if no one was there to see it, his story didn't add up. Anyways, he was moved to the Williams Head Institution, and then in 1994, he decided to sue Corrections Canada for $730,000 because he feels he should have been moved earlier away from Toronto because of his undercover work. He claims that 2 days after being housed in Toronto, he was attacked and then refused a transfer. He was told that he could either live in virtual confinement for 23 and a half hours a day or be part of the general population. So now that case was heard and a decision made, but he didn't get anywhere with it. He was given day parole in 2003. That was revoked a year later when he didn't report his financial dealings and then was accused of defrauding his employer of $40,000. And then in May of 2010, he got full parole after 26 years. He did have a few conditions on him, but one of the big ones was to report any new relationships with women to his parole officer. But in 2012, that parole was revoked when he was found to be having an intimate relationship with 3 different women. He says it was because he developed a drinking problem after a breakup with one of the women that he had reported having a relationship with. And the parole board stated in their decision, your recent behavior on full parole compares with previous pattern of criminal behavior. Given your deceit, relationship dishonesty, and the potential for financial stress, in all these circumstances, the board finds that your risk elevated to an undue level. And then in June of 2014, he was again granted full parole under the conditions that he attend AA meetings and stay away from alcohol, attend counseling, and again, report any intimate relationships to his parole officer. Now, as far as I know, he is living in BC somewhere, probably sleeping with a number of women, hopefully with bedrooms on ground floors. And that was the murder of Jeanette Kelly. And I will be back again with another case. Thank you so much for watching.